Good morning, Dan and Amy. Here is what Trump said in the post-meeting presser as to the agreement that Kim Jong-un and the president inked and what that portends for the future of U.S.-North Korean relations.
Chairman Kim and I just signed a joint statement in which he reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We also agreed to vigorous negotiations to implement the agreement as soon as possible. And he wants to do that. This isn't the past. This isn't another administration that never got it started and therefore never got it done. Chairman Kim has told me that North Korea is already destroying a major missile engine testing site. That's not in your signed document. We agreed to that after the agreement was signed. That's a big thing. For the missiles that they were testing, the site is going to be destroyed very soon.
And that's all well and good, but in addition to the problems trying to establish some sort of trust relationship with the brutal Kim Jong-un regime, and we've been down this road with the North Koreans several times over the last 30 years, you've got another problem that's being under-discussed in the wake of the meeting, and the problem is China and China's disinterest, I should say uninterest, lack of interest, in fact, opposition to something like a reunified Korean peninsula. And for more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by our friend and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He's Admiral James Stavridis, the author of the book Sea Power, The History and Geopolitics of the World's Oceans. Admiral Stavridis, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Dan and Amy.
You had this interesting piece in Bloomberg about China's long game for this summit that took place yesterday, in which you make the point about China wants to prevent the ascension in the region of, say, a South Korea, and so North Korea acts as a nice bulwark for them, in addition to other interests China has that have to be considered in the context of anything we are able to do or not do with the North Koreans.
Exactly right. What I'm concerned about is we needing to get this current process out of the U.S.-North Korea alone channel and get China engaged in this. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to solve the problem in North Korea, all roads to Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, lead through Beijing, because China has so much economic and military leverage in the region. So as I said in the piece, we have to understand what China wants here. They want a divided peninsula. They look at what happened in Germany when East Germany and West Germany unified at the end of the Cold War about 20 years ago. That created a very powerful entity on the doorstep of Russia. And Russia has the same view of this newly powerful Germany that China does, as it imagines that peninsula unified and drifting toward the west. So if we can work with China, I think we have a chance at landing this thing diplomatically over time, Dan.
But you also suggest in your piece that we're not playing the same game. We're playing checkers with the North Koreans, and they're playing Go.
Yeah, Go is this ancient Chinese game, more complex than chess. China thinks in terms of what's going to happen 100 years from now. Here in the United States, we have a, shall we say, a shorter attention span. Look, I worked in the Pentagon for many years as a four-star admiral. We were doing high fives when we had a 3-year plan. So China thinks long game. Long game is China dominating East Asia. In order to do that, they don't want a unified Korean peninsula. They want control of that region ultimately, and they're playing a smarter game than we are at the moment.
Well, what we learned is that President Trump had offered protection for Kim Jong-un. What other security concessions do you think Kim Jong-un asked for from Donald Trump?
I think Kim has a long shopping list, Amy, that starts with reduction of U.S. troops on the peninsula, significant reduction in our exercises, guarantees that we won't fly long-range strategic bombers in the region, we won't operate our warships certain distances from North Korea. He'll have a very long shopping list. We got to listen to what he's asking for, but more importantly, we've got to see real action from him before we take those kind of steps. The summit was a good thing, but now the hard work begins. We've got to have patience to bring this thing home.
So how do we get China to the table on this with our disagreements over sort of ownership rights to the South China Sea, as well as their interests in subjugating Taiwan?
Yeah, we have three big disagreements with China, and you've named two of them. They claim the South China Sea, an enormous body of water the size of the Caribbean, as their territorial sea. They're going to continue to pull at Taiwan. And then thirdly, it's the ongoing cyber conflict. That's everything from intellectual property that they steal from us to their intrusion into our networks, which are at least as bad as what we've seen from Russia over the last 10 years. So those are significant disagreements, but I think that because it is in China's interest not to have a war in this peninsula and our interest not to have a war in this peninsula, in this particular case, our interests converge. I think we can pull them to the table as long as we are willing to live with a divided peninsula, and I think that's an acceptable outcome for the United States.
Well, do you think President Kim Jong-un wants his country to be Americanized? So that, President Trump talked about building condos. They've got this great beachfront property there, which was kind of goofy. But he is a real estate mogul for a reason. So,
sure. I think he showed Kim a video on an iPad of what your country could look like, just like when you go to one of those timeshare places and they show you your condo.
Sure.
And
who doesn't enjoy
think
those?
That Kim. Exactly. How did that work out financially? I think Kim is not looking to become an Americanized state, but I think he would like a higher level of prosperity. Look, what Kim is all about is staying in power. He's a third-generation brutal dictator. He will do whatever it takes to stay in power. If he can stay in power and show his people some level of prosperity while maintaining control, that's a pretty good outcome for him.
Do you think that in terms of incentivizing him to denuclearize, in addition to the essentially security guarantees, the regime guarantees, which is more impactful on someone like Un? Is it the prospect of military action, or is it the threat that his own kind of the own conflicts within his communist regime create for the regime's sustainability?
I think it's both, and he will respond to a reduction in military threat. That's the external side, and you're absolutely right, Dan, to raise the internal side of this thing, because in the end, and we know this, all politics are local, and for someone like Kim, he has got to maintain iron control, but he's got to open the taps a little bit and show his people some level of prosperity. Despite the fact that North Korea is one of the most closed societies in the world, there is information drifting into the 25 million people there who look at what's happening in the South, a land of incredible wealth, 15th largest economy in the world. They were at the same starting point at the end of the Korean War. Mm-hmm. Kim would like to get a little of that into his own country as well.
What was the biggest mistake of the Clinton deal 25 years ago? Why did that fail fundamentally? Was it their belief that the North Korean regime was ready to topple because of their internal contradictions, and they kind of overshot their anticipation on the matter? Was it inspections? What lesson can we learn from the failure of that deal?
2 points. One is a tactical point, which is that we were unprepared to do the hard technical work of not only inspections, but following those inspections, verifying them, and insisting that there be a regime in place to continue that process. So there was a tactical failure. The strategic failure, Dan, was exactly as you portray it. It was our misplaced view that somehow by opening Korea to the prospects of the world, that regime would fold up. I don't think we have that same naivete at this point. So I'd say, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say we have a 70% chance of landing this deal diplomatically. That's the good news. The bad news is, let's face it, there's a 30% chance this thing could drift back into a real conflictual standoff between the sides.
All right, well, that's a hopeful note. He is former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Admiral James Stavridis. He's the author of the book Sea Power, The History and Geopolitics of the World's Oceans. And also, you want to check out his piece in Bloomberg at Bloomberg.com, China's Long Game for the Singapore Summit. Admiral Stavridis, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks as always, Dan and Amy.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more